Alright, it's time for baking bread with Jacob. Welcome.
To my house.
So, we're cooking today some recipes from the Artisan Bread in 5 Minutes series. I hope you enjoy. This is the master recipe by request of Miss Jody Greenwald. Thank you very much. Very easy recipe. There's 4 ingredients. The very first ingredient is water. This is probably the most crucial part. You need it to be lukewarm. Lukewarm, I think, is around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. If you go too much hotter, you will kill the yeast. Too much colder, and they're not going to grow, not going to bloom. So, very first thing we have 3 cups of water. You can measure out. We need 1.5 tablespoons of yeast, 1.5 tablespoons of kosher salt. Don't use iodized. It needs to be big and flaky. And then we have here 6.5 cups-ish of flour. We actually do it by weight. We go for 925 grams in this case. So the first step is you get your water in here. I just poured it in so it's still nice and lukewarm. And the very first thing we're going to do is just add in the yeast and add in the salt. And on a lot of bread recipes at this point, you'd let the yeast start to bloom. You don't have to do this at this point. You can just dump it in, mix it around, make sure it's sort of all getting nice and absorbed. And once it's in and sort of mixed up, you can start with the fun part, and that is the flour. So at this point, you can either continue to do it yourself or get a fun assistant, because it's going to be very messy. So you go ahead and just start dumping it in little by little and start mixing it in. You don't want to really knead any of the dough. You just want to get it all wet. And just keep adding it in. You can see it's starting to get all disgusting. This will be incredibly messy, and it will take you some time to get it off your hands later. And you will find it stuck to your arms in random places later on in the day. And it will hurt when you pull it off. My lovely assistant is going to keep adding it here. Mixing it up, getting it all nice and gross. Now the other option, and for this case, is if you're a little too afraid to do it by hand, you can use a stand mixer, but make sure you use a dough hook and make sure it's on low, because you don't want to knead it. You don't really want to mush it up too much. All you're trying to do is get it to all combine together. Now this container I'm using is I got it from a kitchen supply store, but it's really any container. In this case, you're going to want one about this size. It's a 5-quart container, but you don't want it to be airtight. You're basically going to want to let it sit in here, and you want to be able to put it in the fridge and not have an airtight lid on it. So as I'm mixing it up here, you'll see it's starting to get hard to really get it all combined. Make sure you get into all the corners. You want all of it to get soaked up. Now, compared to a lot of doughs, this dough will, what most bakers would say, would still be very wet. It's a very wet dough, and that's the point. It allows you to basically take it out of the fridge, let it sit for about an hour to warm up to room temperature, and then just throw it in the oven. No kneading, no anything necessary. So at this point, the dough is pretty much mixed up. Just want to get those last little pieces of dry flour on the bottom all mixed in. And in cases like this one actually looks like it's just a little bit dry. I'm actually probably going to add just a little bit more water. My assistant would grab another little, maybe 1/4 cup, and we'll go from there. You could actually do the water by weight as well, but I guess I'm just not that exact. Let's
Here's a 1/4 cup.
I'll pour a little bit in. We'll just start mixing it as we go. Ugh. Very fun to play with. All right, we're pretty much there. I think that was enough. just enough to wet all the flour. So at this point, once you've got it all mixed up, all you're going to do is let it sit out for about 2 hours, uncovered. And what's going to do, this will be the only proofing point of the dough, where it'll actually rise. It should double in size. It'll almost fill this entire container up. And at that point, you're pretty much ready to go. You could pull off a loaf right there and start baking it. But it's a lot easier to handle, a lot easier to shape if you actually let it sit in the fridge first. Once the dough is mixed, you can let it sit in the fridge for about 2 weeks. It'll last. And if you ever want like a sourdough flavor, basically as soon as you're done with the batch, instead of washing out the container, you just leave whatever's in there and just make a new batch right on top of it, and you'll start getting the sourdough flavor. Alright, so at that point, we're done, and we will see you later when it's done and risen.